5.
How bad does your conduct have to be in a position of trust before you are actually brought to book?
4.
We could possibly have the Grenfell report coming out this year. An absolute trio of disgrace and condemnation for the British state.
3.
That's the irony, but that's what the spin doctors will have tried to point me as, that I'm at odds with the Labour Party.
2.
When are some of these people going to be prosecuted and going to jail?
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Alison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. The infected blood inquiry has finally concluded, Alison, after a 5-year investigation, with the inquiry's chair, former High Court Judge Sir Brian Langstaff, not mincing his words. This is a scandal that's seen thousands of Brits infected by contaminated blood between 1970 and 1998, the worst NHS scandal ever in the eyes of many. Almost 3,000 people so far are known to have died after contracting HIV or hepatitis from blood transfusions, while 30,000 in total were given contaminated blood. The inquiry's 2,500-page report found that this, quote, life-shattering scandal was made so much worse by what Sir Brian described as, quote, a subtle, pervasive and chilling cover-up extending to both the government and NHS. The response of those in authority served to compound people's suffering, he said. The scale of what happened is horrifying, with patients, quote, betrayed by doctors. This is indeed an astonishing scandal, Alison, and it does point to something rotten in the state of Britain. Your quote in your column in Wednesday's Telegraph. The link to the show notes in this episode. And just as we're recording Planet Normal, the woman at the centre of another major human tragedy, Paula Venables, is giving her evidence to the Post Office Horizon inquiry. How many more scandals in British life are in the pipeline? The other big news, the economy, with the latest data putting inflation at 2.3% during the year to April, down from 3.2% in March. A big drop, but still above the Bank of England's 2% target. And that's why the Monetary Policy Committee may well not cut interest rates for some months yet. A headache for the Prime Minister as the Tories try to convince us the economy's on the mend. Lots to discuss, Alison, but before we start, let's just remind listeners that next week, hooray, is the 200th episode of Planet Normal, and we're celebrating by holding a live recording in London on Wednesday, the 29th of May.
We're getting quite excited, aren't we, in our own way? We're going to be joined by Lionel Shriver, who'll be talking about her fantastic topical new book, Mania, and by, of course, Lord Frost, David Frost, great friend of the podcast and amazing authority on what's going on in the Conservative Party and the government. But also, Liam, we've got just wonderful listeners, hordes of fantastic Planet Normal listeners, including some of the favourites from our long, 200 episode track record, people who have meant a great deal to us and to the Planet Normal family.
And who've appeared on Planet Normal indeed, as listeners, emailing us, telling us their stories, appearing then on Planet Normal. And I wanted to say, Alison, just so everybody's clear, is that there are some tickets left. You can buy tickets if you're not a Telegraph subscriber, that's worth saying, but you have to take a free trial, which comes with no obligation whatsoever. So this is not just limited to existing subscribers. If you sign up for a free trial, which, as I say, has no obligation, you don't pay money for that trial, then you can also buy tickets to Planet Normal on the 29th of May at Cadogan Hall in central London, kicking off at 7 p.m. We're so delighted to be holding this event, and we would love to have Planet Normal listeners with there in force.
And I just want to say, Liam, the tickets are for people, who are students or unwaged at the moment for whatever reason. The tickets are quite expensive. So I've got a couple of top secret Pearson comps. So if you think you're a deserving person, or if you know Planet Normal fans who'd love to come but just can't quite get the cash together, just email us and Auntie Alison will see if she can slip you a golden Willy Wonka chocolate factory pass.
Indeed, at Planet Normal at telegraph.co.uk. But Alison, I must say, even by your standards, your column in this week's Telegraph, properly full-throated, you are really, really angry, and rightly so, about this ghastly contaminated blood scandal.
You know, amongst the bristling field of stickers, which I have on my computer when we're recording, there's one in the centre and it's got a word on it. It begins with J, ends with L, and it's got an exclamation mark. Jail.
Yeah.
When are some of these people going to be prosecuted and going to jail? I have read Sir Brian Langstaff's extraordinary report, all 2,527 pages of it. I mean, it's hard to pick out, you know, the most disturbing examples. You have a young woman whose parents, her mum and dad, the dad was given this infected factor VIII blood, which came from America, where, of course, they were getting a lot of the blood donations were coming from drug addicts and prisoners. So a lot of the blood that was coming over was infected with hepatitis and with HIV. And this girl's dad obviously went to bed, had sex with her mum, and he gave the HIV to her. So both parents died of AIDS, leaving the young girl orphaned. Honestly, it's just really hard to imagine the awful things. And the only thing really I can say, I suppose, is that I'd never met him, but Sir Brian Langstaff is obviously an amazingly good person, right? He has moral courage. He has a conscience. These things seem to be sorely lacking in our elite class. So I guess what I was addressing this week in my column, Something is Rotten in the State of Britain. We have got at the moment Paula Venables giving her evidence in the Post Office inquiry, of course, speaking fluent management speak, Liam. She said there is an issue of unknown unknowns. Well, there we are. That's the Donald Rumsfeld defence, isn't it? All those unknown unknowns when thousands of sub-postmasters were using a new system that was disappearing money, and then they were hammered for that. But Paula had unknown unknowns. And she said, if you don't know something, it's hard to ask questions. That's why you're paid a gigantic salary for being the CEO of a major company. And she talked about around managing information, around corporate memory, around Fujitsu not sharing information. And amazingly, Liam, she says there was no corporate memory of the Fujitsu contract. Well, look it up.
Yeah,
there'll be files, you know. Go and do some due diligence, you absolutely appalling woman. She's like the mousy next door neighbour in Keeping Up Appearances who pops round for a cup of sugar, this woman. Utterly mediocre. And I'm boiling angry, Liam, as you can probably tell, because all of these people in the infected blood inquiry, these high up NHS people, these senior clinicians, the politicians, they are all paid large amounts of money because the buck stops with them. But the buck doesn't stop with them, does it? When things like this happen, they're nowhere to be seen. So I really now want there to be criminal proceedings against these people, and particularly in the infected blood scandal. Just one final story, probably in the 2,527 pages of Sir Brian's report, a story about Trelaw College, a state school in Hampshire, which specialised in treating children with haemophilia. And there was an on-site NHS centre at Trelaw College, which gave children injections of different types of factor VIII, with the clinicians being, quotes, well aware of the risk of infecting them with HIV and hepatitis. And these are Sir Brian's own words. The children were often regarded as objects for research, rather than first and foremost as children, whose treatment should be firmly focused on their individual best interests alone. This was unethical and wrong. There were multiple research projects on the children during the 1970s and early 1980s, when informal consent for participation was neither sought nor given. Now, those kids, Liam, were sort of from yours and mine sort of childhoods. And one of the pupils, now my sort of age, between our ages, recalled that the doctors told his class who had contacted HIV from the donated blood by pointing at individual kids and saying, you, not you, yes, you are HIV positive, etc.
God, it's like being picked out for a firing squad.
a death sentence. And let's just finish here. Only 30 of the 122 pupils with haemophilia at Treloar in the 1970s and 1980s are still alive. Only 30 of the 122 pupils. I think it was a state-sponsored massacre. And I think it's all very well Rishi Sunak standing up in the Commons with a sort of trembling lip and saying, this is a day of shame for the British state. Yes, it is. And who is going to pay the price for it? Because giving them compensation, which is now going to be paid for by the British taxpayer, who had nothing to do with those criminal mistakes. They were made by senior individuals, and those people must be brought to justice.
You know, I thought your column was effective, Alison, in drawing together various scandals that are being reported on intensely at the moment, not just the contaminated blood scandal, but of course, the Post Office Horizon scandal you've been talking about. And also there was another parliamentary report, wasn't there, this month, co-headed by Labour MP Rosie Duffield, who we'll be talking to later, about following from the Ockenden report, which we discussed on Planet Normal. This new parliamentary inquiry is about the sorry state of maternity services here in the UK. You said in your column, something's rotten in the state of Britain, of course, paraphrasing Shakespeare's Hamlet, as you so often do, bringing Shakespeare into your columns. I was reminded, just while you're talking there, about that other quote in Hamlet, and there are so many good ones, but the one that sprung to my mind is that one may smile and be a villain. Now, all the people we've been talking about, all the people involved at an official level in these episodes deny criminal wrongdoing. I must say, though, given the fact that there is death in the mix here, Sir Brian Longstaff's report is authoritative and I would say unanswerable.
Yeah.
And how bad does your conduct have to be in the public sector, however well connected you are, however, whoever your friends are, how bad does your conduct have to be in a position of trust before you are actually not just ticked off or allowed to fail upwards and promoted out of trouble until people are actually brought to book? The law has to be involved here because the harm done to so many people by people in positions of trust and authority is so terrible. And what really came out of the report into contaminated blood for me was the role of civil servants who orchestrated the cover-up. Now, I've known Ken Clarke for a long time. You've known Ken Clarke for a long time. I'm not saying that he isn't completely free of any guilt as the minister who has been blamed for the contaminated blood scandal. But he has told me many times that the civil servants didn't tell him what was going on. And other cabinet ministers and ministers of state have told me before this report that their attempts to inquire about the contaminated blood scandal were consistently fobbed off by civil servants. Now, civil servants are very, very good at, accusing ministers of bullying, getting ministers sacked, particularly if the ministers aren't to their ideological liking. But they're very, very good also at wriggling out of blame, remaining anonymous in the shadows and not actually taking responsibility for their actions. They are public sector servants too. They are on good wages a lot of the time and massive pensions compared to the rest of us, backed by taxpayers. And we really need to see some kind of accountability here in the public sector. It wasn't the system. It wasn't lessons must be learned. There were individual people that consistently made individual decisions that led to not just this tragic outcome, but the subsequent cover-up. And that's why families of people who have died have been made to wait so long for compensation. It's outrageous that they've been humiliated, their dignity dented, along with the tragedy that they've had to endure. There's lots that's good about the UK, Alison. I love this country, as you know, but when it comes to inquiries, when it comes to public sector cover-ups, when it comes to wriggling out of blame, I'm afraid my country makes me anything but proud.
I'm starting to hate it, Liam. When I was reading Sir Brian's report, he actually, talking about civil servants, Sir Brian quotes one civil servant's memo in which he complained that a health minister had started to be, quotes, too sympathetic to the victims.
What is the minister there for? Obviously, there's public accountability. You've got to make the sums add up. You can't drive the country into bankruptcy. But ministers that are there, elected people, accountable to their electorate to stand up for us.
But it's the civil servant ticking the health minister off for being too sympathetic to the people who have been poisoned. They were effectively, poison was shot into the veins. And I think it's a notorious scandal. I mean, I have a dim memory of an experiment that took place in the United States in the Deep South. I believe it was mainly black men, of the Tuskegee experiment, where, they were given certain kind of hormones, I believe. And that is now a sort of landmark case of utter disgrace.
It's why so many African Americans were disproportionately skeptical about taking the COVID vaccine.
Oh, that's interesting. But yes, because, this experimentation and the experimentation that was done in that school on children, there is a Nuremberg Code, Liam, which is actually specific about doctors not being able to conduct unevidenced experiments. But I think it's just worth pointing out. So our country, you could say it was good at having public inquiries, because we certainly have enough of them. Listeners will know that the COVID inquiry is rumbling on at a cost of £300,000 a day, money which I think should be going to children.
A lawyer's bonanza paid for by us.
But also something I did a little bit of looking up stuff, bit of research, Velma research. Apparently a listener, this is fatal, a listener told Liam in a pub that he really liked Liam's Scooby-Doo impersonations. so we're doomed now.
Happens a lot.
Yeah, it happens
hey,
a lot.
Scoops.
But listen, Liam, other countries dealt with their contaminated blood scandals more than 20 years ago. And in France in 1999, former Socialist Prime Minister Laurent Fabius, former Social Affairs Minister Georgina Dufoy, and former Health Minister Edmond Hervé were charged with manslaughter. Now, Hervé was found guilty, although he wasn't jailed, while Fabius and Dufoy were acquitted. But a guy called Dr. M. Garetta, he was the director of France's National Blood Centre. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. So other countries can do this properly. If you had tried anything like the infected blood scandal in the United States, imagine the lawsuits that these people would be hit with. And what I want to know is, why is it the public which is having to pay? So it's estimated that the infected blood victims and their loved ones will get about 10 billion. If we had settled this 20 years ago, it would have been a much more comparatively moderate bill, right? So it's idiots at the top who've cost us a huge amount more money. The compensation for the postmasters will rightly be generous. That's going to be billions. So we could be looking, this is just for the 2 inquiries, never mind everything that's in the post, and that we could be looking at well north of £20 billion for the ineptitude, arrogance, and contempt for ordinary people shown by individuals in our system who, as I said, command huge wages. And this is really interesting, Liam. Just listen to this. So one of our many fantastic listeners, this is from Martin. Martin has been closely involved with the Grenfell inquiry, which has slightly dropped out of public view, hasn't it? So Martin says that essentially Rishi Sunak has this explosive Grenfell report now on his desk, written by Sir Martin Moore Bix. And Martin's saying that Sunak must be working out the best, brackets least worse, political timing for releasing the Grenfell report. Can he really hold it back until the general election? And he is also saying that the inquiry report now is going through the sort of various bits of checking, but he says the report will be excoriating. This is someone close to the Grenfell inquiry. Failure of culture and leadership in the civil service over decades. And he also says, and this is a little thing to brighten our day, he also points out that in the frame will be Sadiq Khan, who was Fire Minister in 2009. So there are a lot of people, again, can you imagine, co-pilot, can you imagine that having had this infected blood inquiry and the report, how devastating that is? Can you imagine that we're going to have the post office thing coming to its culmination, and then we could possibly have the Grenfell report coming out this year? An absolute trio of disgrace and condemnation for the British state.
A cacophony of woe. And it's worth remembering, Alison, that this contaminated blood scandal, the inquiry only happened because Theresa May was forced to announce the inquiry in 2017 after she lost her majority. So, this isn't the state fessing up. Our political class was brought kicking and screaming to this point. And as you say, Sir Brian Longstaff has done an absolutely fabulous job. Before we talk to our latest Planet Normal guest, let me just briefly mention the economy. Inflation is down 2.3% during the year to April, sharply down from 3.2% during the year to March, but higher than expected, that 2.3%, still above the Bank of England's 2% target. The Monetary Policy Committee meets on the 20th of June. I think with inflation still above target, they're not going to cut rates in June. There's no MPC meeting in July. There are only 8 each year, and some months there isn't one. The next Monetary Policy Committee meeting is in August. That's the, I think, earliest that interest rates can be cut. Now, a lot of Planet Normal listeners will be happy that interest rates are staying at their 16-year high because they may be living off their savings. They may need that interest, particularly if they're pensioners who aren't working. But a lot of younger people, a lot of families with mortgages, a lot of businesses that are heavily indebted, a lot of people with other personal loans are desperate for rates to come down. We've had 13 interest rate hikes since inflation exploded in the UK. Inflation's now down, all the way down from 11% plus back in October 2022, but not down enough, I would say, for interest rates to be lowered before August. And that's going to cause Rishi Sunak a political headache. The Tories wanted the Bank of England to do 2 or 3 interest rate cuts before an election in October or November. I can't see that happening now.
I think I should apologise, Liam, probably sounding a bit shrill. I know you'll say I probably often sound shrill with my rants.
Alison, anyone that reads your column about this inquiry and the range of inquiries and scandals that we've had in the UK, I think if they didn't see that your heart was in the right place and that you were on the side of the public here and ordinary people, they weren't being objective. That would be a mischievous interpretation of what you've written. Look, if journalists like us don't get excited about things like this, when do we get excited? When do we get angry? When do we get upset? 3,000 people and counting have been killed because of a scandal, a mistake, which may have been an honest mistake. We're not saying it wasn't, but it was the cover-up, the compounding of the error with cover-up, the denial to families that anything had happened that was untoward, the lack of compensation, the fact that this inquiry only happened when a prime minister was under enormous political pressure and other MPs put her head in a vice. This is not how countries should be run. Journalism is absolutely vital for calling our political class to account. And you are at the forefront of that, Alison. I don't think you need to apologise, co-pilot. Now, today's Planet Normal stowaway is the Labour MP for Canterbury, Rosie Duffield. Having left school at 16, Rosie worked in the NHS, then in a primary school, and as a political satire writer before she entered Parliament in 2017. Duffield came to prominence given her determination to stand up for the rights of women, pushing back against what she and many others viewed as the extremism and bullying of the so-called trans lobby, those who argue that men who identify as women are women and should have access to female-only spaces such as public toilets and changing rooms. For her trouble, Duffield's been abused by Labour MPs and investigated by her own party, and Labour leader Keir Starmer is yet to apologise. Rosie Duffield's also just led an important cross-party investigation into the state of the UK's maternity services. But I started by asking her how she feels to be a member of the Labour Party.
It's a bit conflicting at the moment, if I'm honest, Liam. It's not the best time I've had in the party.
And why is that? Try and explain to listeners who haven't been keeping up with the thrills and spills of the debate on trans and other aspects of your relationship with the Labour leader.
It's just been like a roller coaster, really. Our leadership will sort of talk about women's rights and it sounds as though they're getting it. And then they'll sort of say something that completely contradicts what women are asking for. And it's been that kind of roller coaster for a good few years now.
Just to put this in context, when you've been speaking in the House of Commons, some of your own MPs have glared at you, stared at you in a threatening way. How did that make you feel?
I guess that's par for the course in the chamber in Parliament. You know, it's quite a sort of robust debate whenever we talk about these things. But what's really difficult is that every time I'm sort of on my side speaking from my benches, I've got usually a row of people behind me and they're chuntering quite loudly. And some of the things they say about not only women like me, but people opposite when they speak are really insulting and quite difficult to hear for the length of a debate. So after a while, I just try and leave, actually.
How have we got to the point, Rosie Duffield, where the views that you hold that biological women are women, but men who identify as women aren't women and thus shouldn't be given access to female-only spaces such as changing rooms? How have we got to the point where your take on that is seen as extreme within political circles, even though the vast majority of the population would agree with you?
I think it is a sign, really, of how out of touch some political bubbles are. I mean, before I got to Westminster, I heard Andy Burnham and others talk about the Westminster bubble, and I couldn't understand what that was. And I got here and we're just in this tiny little space or echo chamber, all the cliches. We're talking to each other and about each other. And some of the people on the extreme ends of either argument are very close to political leaders and they lobby them and they're kind of in their offices or whatever. And so you do get these extreme views, and the majority of the public, who we should be in touch with as politicians, by the way, every single day via email, if not in person, don't feel this way. So I'm kind of still fairly baffled as to why it's so difficult to understand where the majority of the public are on women's rights.
Now, I must say, since you entered Parliament in 2017, I've had several conversations with you. I've watched you closely. You're clearly, if I may say so, an extremely capable MP, very much ministerial material. Would you want to be a minister in a Labour government?
I'm not sure. I think the problem with being a minister is that you have to toe the party line. And recently, over the admission of a Tory colleague, I've seen my colleagues on my side contort themselves and come up with all kinds of spin that I know they don't believe in, and it's the exact opposite of what they might have said a week before about our new colleague. And I just look at them and feel faintly embarrassed. And I think if I was to toe the line and literally read every single script written for me, I think it would seem very fake. I think I would find that very difficult. But I think that's an understanding that if you're a minister, you have to go along with however absurd the lines are. You've got to go along with them 100%. And I don't think I would feel very comfortable doing that.
Keir Starmer perhaps sensing that so many people across, if you like, Middle England, mainstream voters, particularly women, are totally on your side and think you've been treated disgracefully. He recently invited you for peace talks, didn't he? How long did those peace talks last? And did he apologise?
Well, I had to mention to my whip, actually, that I was getting very fed up and I was very upset about recent additions to our benches. And then he said, should I try and get you a meeting? And we did eventually get a meeting, but not before they asked what it was for. And also, when I did get there, Keir only had about 20, 25 minutes. I think our chat lasted about 17 or 18 minutes, and certainly absolutely no apology whatsoever and no real indication that he understood why I was so unhappy.
He's just worried about winding up the hard left in his party, isn't he?
Potentially. But, that's the joke that my views are seen as kind of right wing. But actually, even though every time I read about myself, it's right of centre or right wing Labour politician, I'm not at all. I mean, I'm very angry about...
But you're absolutely not. You are a dyed-in-the-wool, if I may say so, Labour Party person. You are not a right-wing person, in my view.
No, that's the irony, but that's what the spin doctors will have tried to point me as, that I'm at odds with the Labour Party. But I'm most angry at the moment about the 2-child limit and issues like that are fairly left of centre. So I think it's just convenient, and if people have these extreme views and they have managed to get right in there, right at the top of the Labour Party or politics, and they're very influential. I guess, how do you spin it? You spin it that I'm a difficult woman, or that I'm right wing, or that I'm out of step, or that I'm an old dinosaur. I mean, all of these things have been said about me, and I guess that's politics. It's a dirty game.
How do you feel that the Labour leader has been very keen to pose with another now Labour MP, Natalie Elphicke, MP for Dover, a neighbouring constituency to you, who was a Conservative? I mean, she is properly right-wing.
She's very right-wing, and it's utterly ridiculous. And nobody that I know in the Labour Party has any comprehension of why we would do that, why the leader would do that. It doesn't gain us anything at all. It's a bizarre move, to be honest.
You've also been co-chairing with Conservative MP Theo Clarke the Parliamentary Birth Trauma Inquiry. You've gathered evidence from more than 1,300 parents. You've presented the report to the Prime Minister this month. You're calling for a national plan to improve maternity care. But some of the findings in your report, in many cases, trauma was caused by mistakes and failures made before and during labour. Frequently, these errors were covered up by hospitals who frustrated parents' efforts to find answers. I thought the NHS was the best in the world, Rosie Duffield.
Oh, I think the NHS is under so much pressure, and it absolutely would be. The workforce is incredible, as you know, if you've had any dealings with them. And I think they've just had this storm of COVID, lack of investment, a real problem retaining staff, and staff morale is through the floor. I think all of those things, plus just the culture of not listening to women generally, it's all contributed. There's so many things to unpack, but I think we're getting there with understanding what needs to change.
The report found, quote, poor care is all too frequently tolerated as normal, and women are treated as an inconvenience. Let me say to you, Rosie Duffield, my kids are now in their late teens and early 20s, and my family's experience of childbirth within the NHS was also absolutely terrible. This was a long time before COVID.
Yeah, well, I'm really sorry. I mean, I hear that all the time. So yeah, you're right. That doesn't excuse it. I think we just have to make these changes dramatically, quickly, and it's not good enough. I mean, there's no excuse I'm going to make. It's not good enough. It's a basic, simple thing that the majority of women, want to go through at some point in their lives, and we should be able to handle it.
Are you glad then that Wes Streeting, the Labour Shadow Health Secretary, is striking a slightly different pose, if you like, in terms of Labour's positioning over the NHS? It's a service, he says, not a shrine. We got to stop treating it like a kind of religious cult. We need to reform the NHS. Do you think we should reform the NHS?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really sensible want, and it's hear all the time about how free it is, but we all pay for it, in some way or another. And the staff need realistic expectations, not to be called angels all the time. They're human beings doing a bloody difficult job. And they're ordinary human beings under a hell of a lot of pressure, but they also need realistic expectations and goals. And you're right, we don't need to deify them. We need to give them the right respect.
You've previously worked in the NHS, just like you've previously worked in education. So how do you feel when you're overseeing a report that says there were many stories of care that lacked compassion, including women not being listened to when they felt something was wrong, being mocked or shouted at, being denied basic needs such as pain relief? That isn't about money. That isn't about resources. That's about the attitudes of people working in the NHS, many of whom do a great job. But many of them don't.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is the largest workforce in the UK. But yeah, I mean, the duty of care is your number one thing when you're working in the NHS and you're working in schools and you're working with vulnerable people. So the people that we found that had been rude to patients, dismissed them, ignored them, there's no excuse for that. That's not okay. But we also need to give people the respect and the pay so that we attract the best kind of people to those roles. And you're right, there's so many brilliant people in the NHS, but of course there's going to be some bad apples as well. And the culture needs to change. The culture of listening to women who are the lowest level of employed staff as well as patients in these situations really needs to change.
We had, of course, didn't we, the extremely comprehensive Ockenden review into maternity services in parts of the NHS. Now we've had this review by yourself and a Conservative MP, a cross-party review delivered to the Prime Minister. Extremely powerful. You don't pull your punches. What do you now want to happen with maternity services, Rosie Duffield? But what do you suspect will now happen?
I really hope the government are going to act on this. They've promised that they will. The Health Secretary was there at our launch and she's promised to implement lots of our asks, which is great. But it's going to take a while to turn it around. It's a huge ship, as you know. What we need is an independent kind of someone overseeing the situation, a bit like Ofsted, but we need someone looking at maternity care who is not biased, not actually within the NHS, but with the qualifications to do that. Someone like Donna Ockenden, perhaps. We need to end the postcode lottery. That's really important. We need to listen to women. We need to see the statistics on Black and Asian women dying in childbirth come right down. All of those things are really urgent, but we need staff to feel valued, respected and listened to as well as patients.
Because the statistics for Black and Asian women are unfortunately disproportionately higher than they are for the population as a whole. It's not that you don't care about non-Black and non-Asian women in childbirth, of course you don't.
No, of course not. It's just that, yes, you're right. That particular demographic are really, they have the worst maternity outcomes and we need to stop that immediately.
Now, your maternity report, which is hugely important, and as you'll know, because you're a huge supporter of Planet Normal, Alison and I have been talking a lot about maternity services over the months and indeed years. And your report is hugely significant, but it's been overshadowed, hasn't it, to some degree, by the report into contaminated blood. Where do you think that stands in the sort of pantheon of UK scandals?
That's a really good question. And thank you, yes, both of you for talking about this and covering it as much as you do. It's really important that we get that out there and that women feel they're able to talk about it because it's still a bit of a taboo, actually, talking about some of these things and dads and what they've experienced, like you've mentioned. I think it is really scandalous, but what happens is that we don't join the dots. And with the blood scandal, everything was joined and made a national problem, just like the post office, and rightly so. But I think with maternity, we've been looking at various different trusts and what happens there. And we haven't been joining that up and learning and using best practice, just changing what's happened in one trust. My trust, for example, East Kent maternity report was awful by Bill Kirkup, really damning. Babies dying that shouldn't have died. And that has started to change. So my trust has started to turn things around. But if we join it all up together nationally, that's going to be much more powerful, much more useful.
So Brian Falstaff, former High Court judge, of course, he hasn't minced his words, has he? This episode has been life-shattering, he says. Almost 3,000 people are so far known to have died after contracting HIV or hepatitis from those faulty blood transfusions between 1970 and 1998. How do we rebuild trust in the NHS and in the broader Hippocratic Oath? Sir Brian singles out NHS staff. He says ordinary people were, quotes, betrayed by doctors.
It's a really good question. How do we build trust? We've got to build trust by getting better, by never having these things happening again, either individually or on a large scale like this. And I think, it's $1 million question. I'm not going to pretend to know the answer, but things have to change. Wes's comment that you mentioned is really important. We've got to stop acting as though the NHS are sort of gods and they're human beings with human problems and human issues, and humans make mistakes. We've got to be able to say that and criticise when that happens and stop it happening and quickly, not just tolerate. And I think we have to be more prepared to call these things out. I've met lots of whistleblowers over the last few years with these various reports, and they are not listened to. We have to listen to them.
They're not only not listened to, they're often systematically smeared and intimidated.
Yeah, that's true as well. And we can't carry on like that. We just can't. The whole system's going to collapse otherwise. We do have to have trust in the NHS, and we should. I'm starting to get it back in my trust. So let's hope we do the right things and that starts to change.
I must say, since you entered politics, you've been far from a kind of lowly backbencher, even though you've just been on the backbenches and in opposition. You've carved out a big reputation for yourself, or indeed you've had it foisted upon you. Are you glad you came into politics, Rosie Duffield?
Yes, I love my day-to-day job. I love being a constituency MP and being a backbencher, which I will forever be under this leader, obviously. It just gives me a huge advantage that I get to spend more time in my constituency than others would if they've got a brief. And, you know, I get to be a bit freer to say what I think is wrong and how I want things to change. And I don't think, like I said earlier, that I could be someone who kept quiet when I saw wrongdoing. But also, you know, I came here as an ordinary person. I wasn't at university with other MPs. I'm not married to one. I'm not the sister of one. I'm not someone's best friend. I came here as an ordinary woman. So seeing those things with my normal person's eyes is quite shocking at times, but I'm going to carry on calling it out because that's what I'm there to do. I'm not there to be part of any establishment. And I think we need people like me telling the public the truth about politics, not spin. And I won't be able to do that ever, I don't think.
Finally and briefly, you really think that? You really think if Keir Starmer enters number 10, he won't have the guts to bring Rosie Duffield into his government? There's
been no indication that he's going to bring me onto the front bench. I mean, he's been there 4 years and he hasn't approached me yet. So I think it's pretty unlikely. I did have a front bench job and I unwittingly broke the rules of lockdown and lost it. But there are other people on the front bench who also did that. So I don't think that's the reason. I'm too critical of him and the party. And I think that's a no-no. You're not supposed to do that. I'm probably in the wilderness for a while, which is fine.
Rosie Duffield, Labour MP for Canterbury. Thanks so much for appearing on Planet Normal.
Thanks, Liam.
That was a fantastic interview, Liam. You know, we've been obviously highly critical of the political class today, as we often are. But Rosie Duffield really stands out for me as a person of real principle and courage. And I know that after we finish recording Planet Normal today, you are going to the funeral of your great friend, Frank Field. And Frank, you know, has rightly been eulogized since his death for being that moral caliber of human being who really cared about people and what happened to them. And the bravery that Rosie Duffield has shown in a party which was fully wedded and to some extent still remains fully wedded to gender madness, which puts women's safety at risk, as we know from the Hilary Cass report, jeopardizes the safety and future health of children. So it's been absolutely amazing, and I would happily vote for. You know, not a Labour supporter generally, well, certainly not in recent times, but I would gladly vote for the Rosie Duffield calibre of person wherever they were, and I only wish we had more people like her in Parliament.
You know, that's uncanny, Alison, how well you know me, because that's exactly what I was going to say about this interview, that when I was talking to Rosie Duffield, I had in my mind Frank Field, because they're very, very similar people. I mean, how could they on paper be more different? Yeah. They're completely different, but they're so much the same. These are people who are too clever and too honest for frontline politics. And what an awful thing for me to have to say, but that's how I feel after almost 30 years on the front line of British journalism. Frank was somebody who spoke out for underprivileged people. Frank was somebody who marauded across party lines to get things done. He rejected and was the embodiment of the rejection of tribalism in British politics. I hate tribalism in British politics. I hate it when people from parties won't speak to people in other parties because they're worried what their friends in the same party may think. Rosie Duffield is an incredibly bright woman. We are so lucky to have her in our politics. Though, as she said, what are the chances that Starmer's going to give her a front bench job? Almost zero, I would say, because, of course, he's worried what the hard left of his party will think. People in Parliament who think Rosie Duffield is far right because she's standing up for the rights of ordinary women and girls to go into changing rooms and not have to worry that somebody with male organs is going to be in there walking around naked. And that's not an exaggeration. I applaud her. I think it's desperately sad how the Labour Party have treated her. But, you know, this is how politics is. I just watched some incredibly moving footage, and I'm sure you watched it too, of Craig McKinley, the brilliant Conservative MP. And I say brilliant because he's been brilliantly brave. The guy got sepsis. He's just had his hands and feet chopped off, and he's come back to Parliament. He's going to stand again. He's absolutely determined to say in public life. He got a huge ovation as he entered the Commons chamber, which is against parliamentary principle. You're not meant to clap in the House of Commons, but everyone was clapping and whooping that this man had come back to the Commons trying to deal with this massive tragedy. Did Keir Starmer clap? No, barely clapped at all. Why? I guess he was worried what the hard left would think.
Well, I noticed that Rosie posted such a lovely message to Craig on her Twitter feed and said, really looking forward to resuming our heated debate over small boats, etc. Yeah. And I thought, that's the way to do it. They don't agree, but she can see he's a great guy. And I should also say, Liam, that there are these standout people. So Rosie Duffield of the left, Miriam Cates of the right, allegedly far right. These are women who absolutely have been battling the gender identity nonsense and together have made common cause across the aisle. You know, I interviewed Miriam Cates a while ago in her Sheffield home and just always remember her saying to me, you know, what I say, you know, it's nothing to write home about round here. And I thought, no, it isn't. And Rosie and Miriam, how ironic is this, Liam? They speak for the majority of the country, don't they? They're two bright, sensible women who just stand up there and say in Parliament what the vast majority of people think. And the irony is that Rosie Duffield, as a Labour MP, would be much closer. She's not close to the metropolitan left, the university left, the, you know, go and shake your Palestinian scarf left. She is speaking for the ordinary families up and down the country who want their children to grow up, you know, not being told you can have 67 genders. So this is the irony. I'd love to see Rosie Duffield leading the Labour Party. I really would.
She's a kind of red wall MP in Canterbury, in the Garden of England, which is kind of incongruous. But then again, that's what she is. And yet I fear that politics won't be able to process Rosie Duffield and give her a due and give her a chance to influence policy debate and make policy and to get to the top echelons of her party and our political system, just as happened with Frank Field. It's such a shame. I think both of us, aren't we, Alison? We're attracted to people in politics that we see who, even though they are in politics, their intellect isn't outweighed by their ambition. On the contrary, they always put the issues first and their view of the issues. They're not very good at buttoning their lip in order to gain favour within their party hierarchy. And the public is so smart. They can see when people are doing that. They praise and laud them for it. And Canterbury is hardly a safe Labour seat. But Rosie Duffield will surely hang on to her parliamentary perch in Canterbury. And when she does return to the House of Commons after the general election, I will be looking very closely to see if Keir Starmer's got the guts, and yes, I'm talking guts, to appoint somebody to his front bench, an appointment that would be lauded across the country, including by many Conservative voters who've come to admire Rosie Duffield. Not because she holds Conservative views on many things, because she doesn't, as you know, but just because she's got the guts to stand up for what she believes in and to push tribalism away and speak on behalf of many, many people, not least many, many women who are outraged by the behaviour of a lot of the trans extremist lobby and the pandering, frankly, of our politicians, of our media, many of our corporations to that lobby. Now on to our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We love to read your thoughts, the citizens of Planet Normal.
We really do learn so much. I mean, the number of stories I've nicked from your emails, as Halligan will point out. What do I always say to you? Immature poets borrow, mature poets steal. Liz says, I love it when they say lessons will be learned. It has actually come true. The lesson that has been learned is that we now know with absolute certainty that we can no longer trust anyone who tells us that lessons will be learned. Absolutely brilliant, Liz. And David says, something, Liam, I didn't mention in our many inquiries, really, the scandals, is I predict that in 10, 20, 30 years, there will be a prime minister standing up in Parliament who will be apologising and announcing compensation for victims of COVID and excess deaths and the effects of the COVID vaccines. Mark my words. David says, Dear Alison and Liam, I'm a devoted Planet Normal listener and healthcare practitioner and optometrist. I've corresponded with you before about COVID vaccine harms, and I appreciate the efforts you have made to bring this issue to the attention of your listeners. I started to see an increase in retinal vascular occlusions in my practice as early as late December of 2020, says David, and this has not abated. Over the last 3 years, I have submitted 20 yellow card reports to the MHRA, dedicated COVID-19 vaccine yellow card system. I have seen more retinal vascular occlusions, that means blocked retinal blood vessels, than in the previous 20 years of practice combined. Despite recent belated coverage, the vaccine injury train rumbles on, and doctors are seemingly oblivious to the carnage. Please continue with your lonesome coverage on Planet Normal. David.
Very powerful email there. And just to remind listeners, as you said at the top, Alison, David is a practicing optometrist. This is from Ben. Dear Alison and Liam, Liam's mention of spotted dick, in contrast to Alison's summer pudding in a recent Planet Normal episode, reminded me of a mystery. Spotted dick has disappeared from our supermarket shelves. I've searched in Sainsbury's and Tesco's and haven't seen it for months. Why is this, says Ben? What could have happened? Have the political correct police confined it to the dustbin of history on the grounds that the name Spotted Dick is triggering? More dick needed in aisle 7, please, Sandra. A staff announcement, price check needed for dick on till 3. And as for gaslighting, of course, which is a phrase used by Rachel Reeves, she said that the Tories were gaslighting the public on the British economy. As for gaslighting, writes Ben, this term often reminds me of the 1940 novel by Michael Sadleir, which tells the story of a young woman named Fanny Hooper who discovers that she's the illegitimate daughter of a wealthy Englishman and an actress. The novel explores themes of identity, social class, and Victorian society, and Sadleir's work is known for its rich historical detail and vivid characters, making Fanny by Gaslight, FNAR, a compelling read for fans of historical fiction. The film adaptation was released in 1944, says Ben. It starred Phyllis Calvert as Fanny Hooper, James Mason as Lord Manderstoke, and Stuart Granger as Harry Summerford. Have either of you seen Fanny by Gaslight? Thanks for keeping us all sane in an increasingly chaotic world. I haven't seen Fanny by Gaslight. Have you, co-pilot?
I haven't, but that's made me intrigued to go and read the novel. I'm really pleased that we're having our cultural hinterland stretched by the readers. We've probably had more emails about gaslighting than we have about anything else. Proper sense of priorities. This is from Chris. Who remembers back in the day when things just worked? It might not have been perfect, and often it seemed clunky. Why did checks take so long to clear? But fundamentally, the system worked. What happened? I call it the Concorde moment, the time when suddenly you couldn't travel at Mach 2 across the Atlantic. It was about then that light bulbs stopped emitting light you could read by, houses became unaffordable, and everything began to quickly turn to crap. As Alison's article in the Telegraph shows, the rot had already set in earlier, but the systems were in place to disguise it for a while. The country is neither run by its people or for its people anymore. It's run by a load of entitled idiots who hold the people in contempt, exemplified by this latest infected blood scandal. Where one party leaves office with a country in a mess, the next seems to make it worse. It's the economy, stupid, is a phrase oft-quoted, particularly at election times, but I think that has run its course. Ordinary people are sick of being the sacrificial lambs to government spreadsheets and cost-cutting, often caused by bureaucratic incompetence. This latest scandal will rob the public purse of hundreds of millions we cannot afford. There have to be convictions. Let's just get a civil service mentality that says everything is done right first time and that the people come first. Is that so difficult?
Brilliant email from Chris. And the reasons that check took so long to clear, Chris, is because banks wanted to hold on to your money for 3 days to get the interest on it before they passed it on to the person to whom you wrote the check. This is from Robin. I enjoyed, if that's the right word, Alison's article on the infected blood scandal. I urge you to read Black Box Thinking by Matthew Said. And I must say, Matthew Said, who of course writes for a rival newspaper, he's a columnist on a rival newspaper, is one of my favourite authors. He's a brilliant author, very interesting guy. He got to Oxford through sort of unconventional means from a family in Reading, a very modest background, had a Pakistani father, grew up in the 70s, roughly the same age as me. Really one of our top writers. So I'm with Robin on that. What we need, says Robin, is incident, investigation, remedy, reform, accountability, compensation. What we get instead is incident, denial, cover-up, delay, removal of evidence, promotion of perpetrators, inquiry, more delay, payoff, political hand-wringing. Robin. P.S. You forgot to mention the child grooming scandals, Rotherham, Bury, Oxford, etc. Indeed we did, but there's only so many words in each newspaper column. I think you'd have blown up if you'd have mentioned them as well, Alison. Crikey, your head would have come off. Can you imagine?
I think the outrage quotient for 1 week.
The needle on the rantometer was bending.
It was. I'll have to compose myself by the time of the live event so that I seem vaguely plausible.
And on that bombshell, Alison's going to try and be plausible in time for the live event. That's it from Planet Normal for another week as we leave our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of recent views. Email of the week, co-pilot, it's your turn.
We're going to give it to David, the optometrist, for his incredibly interesting email about potential links between serious eye conditions and the COVID vaccine. Thank you, David. Really excellent email. Can you send us your full name and your address, and you will very shortly become the proud recipient of a rare as rocking horse poo Planet Normal mug.
You like that phrase? One of mine.
I don't really like it. I just use it because you use it.
And finally, another reminder about our upcoming Planet Normal event. It is next week, our 200th episode, a live recording at the Cadogan Hall in Victoria, Central London, starting at 7 p.m. We've sold hundreds and hundreds of tickets. There are still some tickets left. As Alison says, there are tickets available for non-subscribers. All you need to do is take out a free, no obligation trial as a Telegraph subscriber, and you can get your Planet Normal ticket. Do come along. We'd love to see you there. The Planet Normal family en masse in central London. The first, we hope, of a series of live Planet Normal recordings across the country.
That's right. Liam and I are so proud, dead chuffed actually, to have reached this milestone. We couldn't have done it without you.
I'm amazed we haven't killed each other, Alison.
That's because we don't record together, let's be honest.
We don't actually physically see each other, do we? When we record, we record remotely. And good job too.
Like any married couple, we have our ups and downs. But anyway, as I said, if you know of a deserving Planet Normal listener who may not quite be able to afford one of these tickets, just email us and mention why. We'll see if we can find a couple down the back of the Planet Normal sofa.
And as we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal and the madness of Planet Earth comes back into you, thanks as ever, not just to our producers, Isabel Bajard, Casso and Louisa Wells, but also to the Telegraph team who are helping us to put together this live event next week on Wednesday, the 29th of May. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.